This handsome bay roan 2-year-old is Abe. He belongs to my friend Brittany over at Circle B Horsemanship. He has been haltered and has had minimal handling on the ground, but is still pretty reactive and kind of feral, so he's here with me for a 30-day start. We'll see how far along he can get. This is only my second session with him. He still wants to be pretty worried about when I walk up to him, and is pretty quick to offer to leave. So I just go ahead and put him to work. I worked him the night before this, and it took me about 15 minutes of messing around in the round pen before he would allow me to walk up to him. I just keep pressure on and drive him around the round pen for a little while, and then I'll ask him eventually to face up again. That time I asked him to change directions. He's extremely willing to face up and wants to give you 2 eyes very easily, so changing directions to the inside is pretty easy for him. I keep chucking my rope at him just to keep driving him and to give him something else to look at. I ask him to face up again. You could see him lick and chew right there. Right as I suggested approaching, he immediately decided to leave. I kind of keep him boxed in here for a second to try to suggest that he stays. Then I went ahead and started moving him around again. I realized that I needed my flag, so I went ahead and grabbed it. Here I'm just moving him around. I'm trying to make his leaving difficult for him, and suggesting that standing and giving me 2 eyes is a lot easier than running around the round pen. This particular day was extremely windy. It was like Montana was trying to set a record, so the sand is flying, everything's gritty. It was a very spooky day to work colts, and a really great judge of character for this guy, as I hadn't handled him very much at this point. There he took a few forward steps when I drew him in. Another lick and chew. He's really sensitive about disengaging when I go to walk around to his hip there, and doesn't act like he wants to leave. He offered that right in the beginning during our first session as well. He's very aware of the human and willing to face up. I did some approach and retreat with him here, let him sniff me, pat on him a little bit, and then walked away to approach him again. He's a lot more interested, a lot more willing to stand now, and isn't looking to leave immediately like he was before. Once again, I try not to sneak around these colts, but I am very aware of how much pressure I'm putting on them. Right here, as I walk away, he takes some forward steps towards me, which is excellent stuff. He has not offered that behavior up to this point, so I was very impressed with it. That change in behavior allows me to walk up and scratch on him. It was like a switch had been flipped right there. He was suddenly a lot more accepting of my approach. A little more approach and retreat is always good. This time I went up to his other side. Touched him with the halter a little bit. and eventually work up to actually haltering him. He never did try to leave during the haltering itself. It was only when I would approach him. It was the same way during our first session as well. I make sure to love on and pet on him quite a lot, and I just barely introduce tipping his nose to me and suggest lowering his head in this session, something that I don't believe he has been taught before, and I had not worked with him with it up until this point. I'm just looking for the tiniest change, and he's pretty willing. Once again, the wind is absolutely ridiculous on this day. Look at how crazy his tail is flapping around. Probably not the most convenient evening to work with horses, but once again, an excellent judge of character. After messing around a little bit with asking him to tip his nose to me and lower his head, I started looking for him to disengage his hinds and step his fronts. During our first session, after I had haltered him, I worked on this very same thing, and he really had a hard time with stepping his fronts at first. He acted like he needed to sell out and leave for just that. But he was always very, very good about his hinds, on and off lead, during his first session as well as this one. But he obviously has the ability to retain information. He had quite a bit of trouble with stepping fronts during his first session, and when I asked him to step fronts for the first time during this second session, he went right back to it, like he always knew how. This guy is a lot more comfortable with me on his left side than he is with me on his right side. And during the first session, he kind of advertised that by trying to switch sides with me. And he shows that right here with his uncertainty. I'm looking for his hip on the right-hand side, and he kind of scatters away from me like he wants to change directions. This colt is pretty sensitive and wants to do the right thing. But there's some spots where it seems like he's trying so hard that he gets in his own way. After disengaging on the right-hand side, I ask him to step fronts. He kind of wants to move his hip around a little bit, but the concept is there. I just stay with him until I get a halfway's quality step and then praise. He has a basic understanding of lunging and is surprisingly feely and soft on the halter. I messed around with lunging during my first session with him as well. I would like if he would walk around, but he's kind of inclined to trot. He's very soft about changing directions. Right there, the wind came up again. I have not thrown the rope over his back before this. He really wanted to sell out and leave right here, so I try to stay with him, and I try to keep him from changing directions as well. I had kind of a mess right here, though, because the halter wasn't tight enough to stay out of his mouth, so I had to get up to him in order to tighten his halter up so it would stay out of his mouth and be fitted properly, and then had to pick back up where I had stopped to continue on with the desensitizing of the rope. He definitely wasn't done, though. There was still a little bit more flightiness there. I'm blocking his eye with my hand right there so he doesn't come over the top of me and change directions. Once again, this right-hand side is his least preferred side. I'm doing my best to stay with him here, try to keep him disengaging. Right there you can see him lick and chew. He kind of decides to stop. So I pet on him and I keep throwing the rope over him for a little while. This colt is really smart. He's a little flighty still, a little reactive, but he's extremely intelligent. He thinks through problems. He's finally settled in here with me just throwing the rope over his back. I throw it over his back a little bit more and then start going further back over his hips and eventually around his back legs. Something that he hasn't had happen before, to my knowledge. He was a little unsure, but never offered to kick at it, which was great. He just felt he needed to move away, so I kept him bent around so he would disengage. And he settled pretty quickly. I just wait until he stands and doesn't have a reaction at all, and then move on to the front legs. He's a little unsure, but he never did anything rash and didn't really try to leave. So I go over on the other side and start back at the beginning with throwing the rope over his back. Again, this is the first time that I have thrown a rope over his back, so he's pretty reactive about it. I try my best to stay with him and to keep his head bent around so he will disengage instead of just selling out and running off. And he settles down quite a bit faster on this side. I treat each side of the horse as if I'm working with a totally different horse. I don't assume that they know what's going on their other side because it's already been done with them. Once he kind of relaxes, I praise. I like that his foot is cocked right there. Throw the rope over his back a little bit more, and I really got exaggerated about it there, like I was tossing something heavy over his back. Then I started working over his hip and going down onto his back legs again. This time it wasn't as much of a surprise because I had already done it. Excellent response, more praise, and then I move on to the front legs. All in all, this was a great second session for the super nice Awesome Roany son. I'm looking forward to seeing what he will be able to accomplish in 30 days. He seems to be a really nice colt. Thanks for watching.